next step is to say, okay, we are facing a world problem. What can we expect from international negotiations? There are two questions, actually, two different questions. The first question is, why is an effective international agreement so difficult to reach? And the second question is, why do we see so many international agreements signed? Some kind of paradox. On the one hand, we say, we can show it's very difficult to have an effective international agreement. On the other hand, we see a lot of ministers and presidents signing. I think there were 190 countries signing. They were in Paris signing the agreement, and there were pictures of everybody. Kyoto was a little bit the same story. There are many other agreements or follow-up agreements where you also see a lot of ministers showing up to sign. Okay, what's going on? For that, we need a very simple theory on international environmental policy issues. The main reason why international agreements are difficult is that they need to be self-enforcing. What is self-enforcing here? Is that those that sign, if you sign the agreement and you sit together with 2 or 3 more countries and you make an effort to decrease the damage for your group, you should be as well off as when you did not sign the agreement. Because why is that so? Because you can always, there's nobody, there is no international institution that can force you to really comply with the agreement. You say, so in the end, it's a very, very strong constraint on international agreements. Now, let me very quickly illustrate this, because I think here we have a lot of people that know know a lot of game theory, and this is about the simplest model you can imagine, where you try to find an equilibrium where out of identical countries, small n countries will sign the agreement. Excuse me. Those that sign the agreement have to agree on the terms of the agreement. This means what will be the efforts they will make. And then you come up with the actions of the signatories and the non-signatories. It's a one-shot model, the simplest one. And there's a very annoying result. Scott Barris, 1994, that tells you when you have increasing marginal cost of emission reduction and constant marginal benefits of emission reduction and identical countries, then the self-enforcing international agreement will consist of 2 countries if n is 2, will consist of 3 countries if n is bigger than 2. So if you have 10 countries, you still have 3 countries only signing. If you have 100 countries, you still have only 3 countries signing. It's very easy to illustrate on a very simple graph. So on this graph, we see here the abatement, emission reduction here. Here the dimension is dollar per ton. Let's start with the damage. So imagine that the damage per ton equals 1 for 1 country. So we have constant marginal benefit of emission reduction. Now, if one country reduces emissions by 1 ton, the benefit for the world equals $10, because it's a world public good. The ton emitted by this country will affect the whole world. Okay, very simple. So the optimal solution, when you consider it as a public good, would be that every country, when it considers how much it will reduce its emissions, will take into account the benefits for the whole world. So every country should reduce 10 the emissions by 10 ton, and the benefit would be here for the world 100. Okay, so it's considered as the optimal solution in terms of public goods. Full cooperation would mean 100 units of reduction. Now, what the solution we will usually see, what we can expect if there's no international agreement is called a Nash equilibrium, where every country just looks at its own benefits. So the total emission reduction will be 1. Okay, so total emission reduction in the world will be 10. Now, what can you achieve with international agreement? There will be 3 countries signing, and these 3 countries will take into account will optimize their joint behavior, and they will take into account the damages they can avoid for these 3 countries. So they will each reduce emissions by factor 3, and you end up with a total effort of 16. So if you kind of very loosely generalize this problem, you can say that international agreement achieves 16% of what should have been done. So it's a very elementary, very simple illustration, but it tells you actually kind of what you could expect. I don't say what you really would. Okay, it could be that if you follow simple theory, that's what you can expect for a pure public benefit. Okay. Now, we see a lot of international agreements, and then we see, okay, what's going on? Why do we see all these international agreements? To understand that, we need to return to what is called, what actually are national politics, because it's finally the president or the minister of these different countries that will sign the agreement. And what we could look at is a very simple model. So Battaglini and Harstad. So a simple model is a green and a brown party. A model, let's say, in 2 periods. A party that is in power has to negotiate the international agreement and will try to stay in power at the next election. Okay? But the election outcome will depend on the climate policy negotiated, but also on stochastic factors. Sanctions are anyway weak because you are dealing with an international agreement, so these weak sanctions are given. Now, what you can expect is more or less illustrated here on this very simple figure. You have a negotiation phase here, and here is an election. And there are 2 options. It could be that the Green Party wins, implements the agreement, even when sanction is weak. The Brown Party wins and escapes the agreement because the sanction is weak. So what we see is consistent with kind of national politics. The Green Party signs the international agreement, and if it wins, it will comply with the agreement. But you could say, yeah, why does it not make very deep investments such that the problem is solved? And Belgium would no longer emit any greenhouse gases. No, because then it's a little bit cynic point of view. You would no longer need the Green Party. Okay, so it's really, you want to be re-elected. So you want them, you want to make sure that they still need you. The Brown Party signs the agreement. They know the sanction is weak. They will not comply because the sanctions are weak, point. And then you have a cycle, you can start again, etc. Now, I think we have to accept that the contribution of international agreements is weak. I don't say the contribution is 0, but it is weak. Okay. The main reason is that you cannot exclude free riders. And when you discuss with countries, they can always, also with political leaders, they can always come up with a good reason for free riding. Because I'd say we were not yet the origin of the problem. It's already so difficult this year, or anything goes for politicians. So we may risk a come and go policy. And I think we have seen that in the US. In the US, we have seen Obama, and then Trump, Biden. I don't know what will happen next. In Europe, we have had a rather strong Green Party in the European Parliament. So we have had a rather green policy. It may be that at some point we may become a little bit less green, and we could again have a change in policy. Now, what also matters is what is called name and shame at the Conference of the Parties. So Paris is an agreement where every year, every 2 years, the parties meet each other and say, yeah, you promised so much. What did you do? You did not do what you promised. So it's name and shame. A second option, which is interesting, is actually some kind of energy and a climate cartel, or energy and climate cartel. Let me explain you the energy and climate cartel. It's actually an idea that comes mainly from the Norwegians, and you will understand why. Imagine that you have a climate policy for important part of the world. So we have here supply of fossil energy, demand of fossil energy. If we have an important climate policy and say that, okay, part of the world will stop using fossil fuel for cars, for trucks, etc. This means that the demand for fossil fuel will shift to the left. But of course, those who have fossil energy will want to sell their fossil energy, and so prices will go down. And if prices will go down, those who continue to use fossil energy, they will see a lower price. And so part of the effort of this shift will be compensated by a lower price. Of course, and now you will understand the Norwegian move. I don't say it's the Norwegian government, but it's coming mainly from Norwegian economists. Okay, maybe interesting to have an energy cartel, not OPEC, but we could have an extra reason, maybe to join OPEC and make sure that for the benefit of climate, we reduce the supply of oil and gas. And then you end up in another equilibrium. So you shift with the energy cartel, you deliberately reduce supply, and you end up again at an equilibrium where you have less fossil energy use, and of course also a higher price for the Norwegians, for Saudi Arabia, etc., etc. So this is the kind of idea. Okay. We did forget adaptation. Adaptation will be important, very important. We see the climate changing. A lot of us are installing air conditioning, okay, because we are afraid. And I'm sure in Paris, it can be pretty hot in the summer. And maybe you get used to it, but it may be a lot of comfort if you have air conditioning. So future damage is coming. Okay, it's nothing you cannot avoid. You can try to avoid part of the damage, but normally the climate change that you have is already there. It will continue to increase. Temperature will continue to increase the next 20, 30 years. Now, the nice thing about adaptation is that we don't have to worry about international agreements, because the benefit of adaptation, the benefit of any adaptation policy is for the country itself. And the cost is also for the country itself. So there you can rely to a large extent on the countries to do the necessary efforts. What are the problems? The problems are, of course, uncertainty. We don't know whether we want to adapt for a higher sea level of half a meter, of 1 meter. The poor countries, think about Bangladesh, etc., they bear disproportional cost. And we should not forget that we are trying to adapt for the future. And whenever a politician has to make decisions, think about pensions in France. You have to take decisions for which will be beneficial for the coming generations. It's always hard for a politician to say, okay, I will ask an effort from the current generation in order to improve the fate of the next generation.